if you describe in scientific terms the spiritual realm, you end up with interdimensional, and it's really just the same thing.
Yeah.
But it gives them control over the narrative. It gives them control over saying, hey, we understand this. This is something that's not from the Bible. This is something that we, and I think that's interesting though, because you still end up with like a changing of the guard, so to speak. You mentioned earlier evolution and evolutionary science, and that's still, is still alive and kicking. But you see that this transition is going to have to occur to I am assuming from what you've seen, this transition is going to have to occur where we got to move. The secular world has to move from traditional evolutionary science over to this kind of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, new agey type stuff. And that's something I was going to ask you at some point, was how do you see that changeover occurring? Like, is Neil deGrasse Tyson just going to change his mind about evolution? Or
yeah, that's great. Well, I mean, even if you look at, Richard Dawkins, like he's probably the most vocal biological evolutionary guy, evolutionary biology, that's his department. Astrophysics is Neil deGrasse Tyson and Michio Kaku and some of these other guys. But when it comes to biology, Richard Dawkins is probably one of the most well-known evolutionists, atheists out there. But if you watch the documentary Expelled, he even talks about panspermia.
What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology, and designed a form of life that they seeded onto, perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
Many people are extremely illogical.
And so, like, he understands intelligent design, but he won't accept that Yahuwah is that designer. It's got to be an alien. I mean, all you do is push the question further out. Well, who designed that guy? Or who designed the guy before that? I mean, eventually you've got to get to a first cause. And the Ancient Aliens panel, I think it was even Giorgio, in fact, I think may have said this, but Eric von Daniken was there too, and he talked about this, is that they recognize that you eventually have to push this narrative back far enough that you get to a first cause, a creator God.
How many of you seen the movie Contact with Jodie Foster? Great movie. And in the movie, the alien was talking to Ellie, played by Jodie Foster, and basically was telling her everyone in the universe, every being in the universe is seeking the same thing, to find out how they got here, what is God, what's our existence. Do you believe, Giorgio, that ETs that are out there right now are looking for the same thing we are?
Absolutely. In fact, it is a question or something that I addressed right before this panel began, where I'm often, and he too, and all of us, were often made fun of, often by saying, or when questions are asked, so you're suggesting that we've had help from aliens in our ancient past. So what are you suggesting? The aliens too? They at some point had help from other aliens? Ha ha ha. Yes, exactly. And as Eric always says, you play that game backwards to the beginning, if there ever was a beginning, and that, for all intents and purposes, is creation. That is God. And that is something he always says. You don't have to lose your idea in creation or God. Well, God is different, it's existence, if you believe in extraterrestrials. They're not mutually exclusive. Quite on the contrary. They all go hand in hand.
And von Daniken, you know, I can't know his heart. You know, all I could do is say this is what he said and my impression of what he said. He grew up Catholic, went to a Jesuit school, so he's Jesuit trained. And he talks about his experience. He says, I still very much believe in God, you know, the God of the Bible. I pray to him every day. And he said, I will turn over in my grave if anybody ever tries to turn this ancient aliens thing into a religion that replaces, you know, God.
Do we lose God? I am still a deep believer in God. I am one of these figures who pray every evening. Now, how is this possible? Just imagine my ideas would be correct. We have been visited by beings from outer space. So then the next question is, where did these visitors come from? From another solar system? What is their evolution? Maybe they have been influenced by another solar system too. Okay, where did the others come from? You can go on and play this game for thousands and hundred thousands and millions of years back. Finally, you arrive to a starting point. And there, in every respect, with religion, you say, here is creation, here is God. You never lose God when you deal with extraterrestrials. I never lost my God. I am one of these figures who still writes, who still prays every day.
What was it that got you fascinated investigating this?
Oh God, that's an old story. I was educated in Switzerland as a strict Catholic. And of course, as a boy, I was a deep, deep believer in God. I still am a deep believer in God. But as a boy, my imagination of God was, whatever God is, it must be something incredibly big, something spiritual, something which does not use a vehicle in which to move to point A to point B, because God is all over. Of course, God does not make mistakes, etc. Then I was educated for 6 years in a Catholic boarding school led by Jesuits, and there we had to translate parts of the Bible from Greek to Latin, Latin to German. And all of a sudden I realized the God of the Bible is not what I thought, what my imaginations were. The God in the Bible made mistakes. The God in the Bible, he used vehicles to move from point A to point B. The God in the Bible, he descended with smoke, fire, trembling, loud noise, etc. So I simply had doubts in my own religious education. And I wanted to know, what is this all? That was the beginning. I was then starting to read the beginning of other religions, not only our Christian and Jewish tradition. I wanted to know, what did the old Indians say, the old Meier, and so on. And that was the beginning of Chariots of the Gods.
So on the one hand, he says that he believes in the God of the Bible. Of course, that's, I always, when I hear that, I'm like, okay, which God? There's lots of gods in the Bible. Which one are we, the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the ones he says don't have any other ones before me?
Right.
But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that he's talking about the one true God when he says God. Okay, so he's coming at that from a Catholic background. Well, isn't it interesting that the Catholics seem to be behind all this stuff? You know, they're the ones that started taking us off of the page of the way, you know, making it illegal to do Passover, and you got to do Easter instead, or replacing Sabbath and, you know, changing it to Sunday. And, you know, so they're hugely responsible for Christianity way off the beaten path. Okay. Then flash forward, you know, later, and you've got Copernicus, Galileo, both Catholics. Interesting. Was it George Lament or something like that? I forget the guy's name, but the guy who coined the phrase the Big Bang, who came up with the Big Bang, Jesuit, Catholic. Mm-hmm. The Vatican has the largest numbers of observatories in the world. One of the most well-known one is the Lucifer telescope. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, how interesting, right? So von Daniken is trained in this environment with the Copernican system and all that, and he starts looking at scriptures. And I went to one of the lectures that he did, and what he does to the book of Ezekiel, like, would just make your head spin. To take, you know, he went through, like, his entire presentation was taking the book of Ezekiel, but basically he's like, if you replace the, you know, the Merkaba, the chariots of the gods, what scripture talks about, wheel within a wheel and all that, and realize this is talking about UFO. And when it's talking about angels, it really means aliens. And whenever it says heaven, it's talking about space. Well, then you get a whole different story.
When I was a boy, I learned that the angels are the good guys. The angels are the one who fly. The angels with helmets or halos around their heads. They were represented. And they told me when I was a boy, Eric, when you live correctly and friendly, and you do not cheat, and you do not kill nobody, you do not lie, finally, when you die, you will go to heaven. Heaven is the place of absolute happiness. In heaven, we are united with God. That's what I learned in school. Later, as an adult, I have to learn that there was a war in heaven. Maybe you remember. In our Christian Jewish tradition, in heaven, one day an archangel with the name of Lucifer came to the Almighty God and said, we don't serve you anymore. And the Almighty God asked for the help of the Archangel Michael to destroy Lucifer, to put him out of heaven. If heaven would be the place of absolute happiness, where you are united with Almighty God, where the angels are friendly and peaceful and singing for God, then there would be no war in heaven. If you are happy, then you make no opposition. So something is wrong with the translations. We should translate the word heaven into space. And the word in space makes sense. We should translate the word angel into extraterrestrial. And it makes sense. We must only change 10 words in our old so-called Holy Scriptures, 10 words in modern terms, and we change the whole meaning of it.
Well, yeah, of course you get a whole different story. If you change everything about the story, you're going to get a different story.
Yeah.
But he did. He changes everything about the story. And I think that he is, frankly, I think he's a victim. I think that he was somebody that maybe started off with real good intentions. His book went crazy popular. And he's even said this before. He goes, I never made any statements. He said, if you go look, my book is full of questions. And in fact, if you go and analyze the TV series Ancient Aliens, they're very crafty about how they do the show. They don't come out and say, this is it. They say, could it be that? And if this, then maybe. What if they will always phrase it that way? Now, of course, it's being put forward as this is what we believe, and it's on the History Channel.
Right.
But from a legal framework, they've got enough that they can say, hey, look, what we were doing is asking questions. You know, you chose to believe it. That's on you. Well, that's convenient. But it has a lot of people seriously deceived. So what's going to happen with the Neil deGrasse Tysons, these people already believe that there's potential life out there. You know, you listen to them talk and, you know, they don't believe in God. Okay. So the idea that we have ancient alien creators, they're all over it. So I don't think it's going to affect them much. I think they're going to be like, oh, of course, you know, we knew this all along.
But their timeline still remains. They can still say they were seeded, but it was just a billion years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. For them, not much changes. The real change comes for the religions of the world. And this came up on a number of speakers and panels and stuff like that. In fact, I watched a documentary last night on Billy Myers. Have you ever heard of Billy Myers?
No.
Billy Myers is when it comes to UFO lore, he's really up there. Right? Billy Myers goes back to 60s and 70s and stuff like that. And he claims to have had lots of close encounters, and being not so much, well, there were some abduction scenarios, but it seems like he was more willingly invited to come on board and interact with Pleiadians. And one of the more famous ones was an attractive, long, blonde, blue-eye Pleiadian named Simjazi. Well, interesting. Simjaza is the name of the leader of the fallen angels in Enoch.
That's interesting. I was just getting ready to bring him up. That's wild.
Now in Enoch, he's a male figure. In the Billy Myers story, this entity is a female. attractive blonde hair, blue-eyed, Nordic type female that came and gave all kinds of prophecies, many of which apparently have come true since the 1960s. And there's a documentary on Amazon Prime that I just watched last night on the Billy Myers story. And I think it was about an hour into it. The Palladians told him to go to Israel, to this specific location, to find a tomb. And according to the story, he and some other people found this tomb. They got in there and they found a jar with some scrolls in it in Aramaic, and they had the Aramaic scrolls translated, and the Aramaic scrolls basically, in a nutshell, said that, yeah, Yeshua, Jesus, if you prefer, was real, but he was one of us, the Palladians.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, he was crucified, but he didn't die, and he was revived in 3 days with our magical arts and whatnot. And entire religion has been a false religion, was based on the true story of this Yeshua, who is one of us, the Palladians, this Jesus character, right?
He claims to have met a man called Emmanuel. And Emmanuel, according to the information in the case, would be the man who we know as Jesus Christ. Or at least the Jesus Christ figure would be, according to the Meier material, a fictionalized version of a real man who lived 2,000 and some years ago, who indeed was crucified but survived the crucifixion.
Als Immanuel gelebt hat,
When Emmanuel lived, who was later falsely named Jesus Christ, and who never had anything to do with the religion which was made from his teaching.
zu tun gehabt mit dem, was aus seiner Lehre als Religion dann entstanden ist.
Emmanuel was not an extraterrestrial. He was therefore a human being from this world, begotten by an extraterrestrial with a terrestrial woman named Mary, and was born here on the earth as an earth human.
Eine Frau namens Maria gezeugt und hier auf der Erde als Erdenmensch geboren.
Und warum hat Asket dich
And why did Asket present you to him?
I don't actually want to say anything about that.
Nicht sagen.
What is the Talmud of Jmmanuel?
The Talmud of Jmmanuel is a document. It came about when Billy Meier and Isa Rashid, who was a former Greek Orthodox priest, were led telepathically to an area outside of Jerusalem by the Plejaren, and they found and dug their way into an abandoned ancient tomb. The stones on the floor, concealed for a while, for 2,000 years apparently, resin-encrusted, animal skin-wrapped scrolls, which they took out and removed from that location. When they opened up one, they found they were in Aramaic. So Isa Rashid took the scrolls, began a translation process. In something like 7 years, he sent Meier about 1/3 of these scrolls, translated from the Aramaic, in which they originally were, into German. He let Meier know that he was now virtually on the run with his family for their lives. He told Meier that there were certain religious factions of a couple major religions that found out that he had these scrolls and that wanted to take possession of them themselves. The information would prove to be enormously heretical. After Isa Rashid had translated a chunk of them, he took them and his family into a refugee village in Lebanon, hid the scrolls in the walls. It's said that within about a week's time, the Israelis came in and destroyed the entire village. The scrolls were destroyed, along with many of the structures and people who lost their lives. Isa Rashid and his family escaped with their lives into Iraq. And 4 years later, Meier found out that Isa Rashid and his entire family had been machine gunned to death, ostensibly by the Mossad in Baghdad. For instance, Emmanuel foretold the coming of another prophet. He named him as Muhammad. He claimed that while this man would be a true prophet, his teachings would also be corrupted and a false and evil cult would be created from them that would give the Israeli people, the distant descendants, no peace until the end of time, unless, hopefully, both the Israelis and their enemies could make a conciliatory and honest peace with each other. The Talmud of Jmmanuel contains prophecies about the fires that would darken the sky when greedy and power-hungry people would ignite the very oil of the earth. The Talmud of Jmmanuel was discovered in 1963. The fires from the Gulf War that darkened the skies did not occur until 1991, 18 years after the Talmud was discovered. There are two artifacts that are shown in this book that Meier discovered in the tomb where the Talmud of Jmmanuel was discovered. The first one was a small figurine that Meier says was left by the Indian healers with Emmanuel, the men who came and ministered to him over those 3 days while he was sequestered in the tomb. The other artifact is a piece of gypsum that Gabriel allegedly gave to Emmanuel. Both of these were left for Meier to discover, as he did centuries later.
Billy, what is God?
God is an imaginary figure which has been created by human beings so they don't have to bear responsibility themselves. Rather, they can shift it onto a deity. But God, in and of itself, is nothing other than a title for a human being who is very highly evolved.
Gott ist also nicht das, was die Menschen irrtümlich annehmen.
God is therefore not what human beings wrongly assume, that he is the creator of life, the creator of a universe, of space. God is nothing other than a title, be it Allah or Shiva, etc.
Der versucht immer eine Macht über sich zu setzen.
The human being always tries to set a power above himself, and he calls it God. This God or this power is supposed to be responsible for him and everything and anything that he says, does, thinks and feels, and so forth, and for his fate.
Der Mensch ist für alles und jedes, das selbst
The
denkt.
human being is solely responsible for each and everything he thinks, does, feels, and undertakes. He must be responsible for it.
Muss das Positive und das Negative.
He must bear and savor all the positive and negative which he processes through his thoughts, actions, and feelings.
They simply want us to look at the facts and learn to understand the truth. The Palladians said there are no earth religions that are valid, that they are all dogmas created by men to create men. We don't need an intercessor, and we shouldn't be taking anybody else's ideas about religion. It's all internal. Everybody has his own contact with the creation.
Because in various cultures from the Middle East, South and Central Americas, and India, etc., all of the gods of the past were extraterrestrial humans. Many of them were the forefathers of the Pleiadians. Because their ancestors set in motion these religions, which have led to many of the problems we face today, they want to help us. But this time they must do so without directly interfering with us, because that would only lead to their being worshipped again or to their being attacked. When we think about God and religion and the universe, we might want to consider that we live on a little ball. Actually, if we put it in perspective, we live on a piece of cosmic lint, somehow magically suspended in space, perfect operation. Everything's going on. In religion, we want to say that God is responsible for that, and that we should also fear God, or maybe we won't be sitting on a cloud after we die. We'll be dipped eternally in molten lava. Not exactly a positive image. And so, on one hand, we have the spiritual teachings from Meier and the various religions of our world. To understand the difference between them, we really have to look at both.
Then the human beings are no longer in a position to think for themselves. They still only think in the framework prescribed by religions, sects, philosophies, and ideologies.
So that's going all the way back to the Billy Meier story. So flash forward to the Contact in the Desert conference, and some of the Emery something, I can't remember his last name, one of the experts on the panel, was talking about documents that the Vatican has that have been under lock and key for a long time, because they know if these documents ever get out, it will destroy Christianity.
My question is, it seems to me maybe last year that maybe it was you, Emery, that talked about going to the Vatican, and there's this library that is like underneath that most people don't know about, and that there are books on UFOs. And so are they part of the secret space program, or can you
Well,
expand?
they have a lot of money. They have the most observatories, including here in the U.S., and own a lot of property all over the world. They're keeping that under cover because it will, if released, destroy religion, especially Catholic religion. So it goes against that. So they're trying to keep that undercover, and they're doing a great job of it. And they have their own archaeological expedition people. They have their own, let's say, space force. They have a lot of things. They are way ahead of the game, and they have so many antiquities and things that really need to be brought to light. Unfortunately, it will change the story of the Bible and where we came from. So they are too scared right now. They actually have fear of that slipping out because they don't think we can handle it. Plus, no one's going to be putting money in the tray when it gets passed around.
And when big D disclosure, little D we just talked about is the people have sightings, the government's starting to admit stuff. Well, big D is when, okay, it's V, right? We Independence Day. We've got the ship sitting up. We could go outside and look at it. That's big D. At that point, he was saying it. He's like, I hate to say it, but religion's dead. Christianity is going to be obliterated. So they're openly admitting. I mean, it doesn't take much to figure that out, that would be the case anyway. I watched this documentary right here, actually, just before we got on the show. The Montauk Chronicles is actually a very disturbing documentary about the Montauk chair and the Montauk experiments, and that took place from 1971 to 1983. 300,000 people, mostly young people, boys, abducted and by the government and subjected to horrific abuse to fracture them into multiple personalities that can be programmed, and that entities can enter, certain fractured personalities, and that they could be used in an experiment with this thing called the Montauk chair that basically projects consciousness through time. So it is time travel and sending various subjects through time to see things. And one of the things they said was they were sending beings back through time to collect DNA from certain historical figures. And in that description, they were showing the crucifixion and showing a DNA sample being taken from the blood from Jesus' feet on the cross.
After years of brutal experimentation, Stuart Swerdlow claims to have been recruited for several missions to travel back in time, where he extracted DNA samples for the purpose of cloning historical as well as biblical figures. With technology given by extraterrestrials, time as well as interstellar and interdimensional travel was possible.
Right, so we're already being set up for this sort of thing, all over the place. So when they show holographic imagery of the crucifixion and they show evidence, and here's his DNA, oh, by the way, here it is right here, I believe that is going to be so convincing that even the elect could be deceived. And sadly, most people aren't even remotely prepared to deal with what's coming.
I agree. And, I want to back up just a sec. So you talked about big disclosure, the day that they come down and reveal themselves and whatnot. I want to just do a quick screen share and read a little bit from the book of Enoch, chapter 10. Because you mentioned Simjaza, it was amazing. I actually just pulled this up and you started talking about it. I was like, that's random. This is Enoch chapter 10, starting at verse 11. And the Lord said unto Michael, go bind Simjaza and his associates who have united themselves with women so as to have defiled themselves with them in all their uncleanness. And when their sons have slain one another, and they have seen the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till their day of judgment, until their consummation, till the judgment that is forever and ever consummated. So what's interesting about this, but I've seen some people do the math on the 70 generations, do the 70 times 70 years, which I think we get from Psalms. It puts us somewhere around the late 1800s, which we see the whole world changes from that point forward, which I think also connects with this. This is Enoch chapter 56. Starting at verse 5, and in those days, this is talking about the end times, in those days the angels shall return and hurl themselves to the east upon the Parthians and the Medes. They shall stir up the king so that a spirit of unrest shall come upon them, and they shall rouse them from their lairs, that they may break forth as lions from their lairs. Anyways, it just keeps going on. But it definitely talks about how the angels shall return. And my question is what your thoughts are on this. We look at, I don't watch a whole lot of movies these days, but I see what's coming out. I'll just go on Wiki and read like a plot, of like Avengers movies and just see what they're doing. And there was a TV series that I watched maybe about 6 months ago. Again, I hardly watch anything, but my wife convinced me to watch this show. It was called I think it was Colony.
Oh, the Colony. Yeah. The guy from Lost.
Yeah, that guy. Did you end up watching that?
I watched most of season 1. Yeah.
Okay. The premise behind that is you've got the good aliens that come first, warning about the really big bad alien, daddy, right? That's coming, and how we need good aliens protection against the bad aliens that are coming. I think you kind of see something similar in like Avengers. You know, you've got these superheroes, which are like the Nephilim type with the powers, right? Superhuman powers, you know, trying to protect the human race against the bad guys. Same thing with Transformers and whatnot. Do you think that that's going to be the narrative when they come down? Yes. Is that they're trying to protect us against, who they say the enemy is going to be Yahuwah or Yeshua, right? Do you believe that that's the narrative that's going to play out?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I was, you got to forgive me because I rabbit trail a lot and sometimes I have a hard time finding my way back. I started to mention Travis Walton a while back, and I don't know if you saw the movie Fire in the Sky, but that's a terrifying movie. Pretty horrific experience that, you know, he went through. But now you listen to him, and Whitley Strieber, same thing. Whitley Strieber was well known for writing a book called Contact, or Communion. I think it was called Communion. He may have written one called Contact too, but anyway, Communion was a big one. And all these people are saying that when they look at the horror and the terror of their early experiences, they're beginning to realize that they had it all wrong, that they didn't understand what was going on. You know, well, what about all the pain that you experienced? Did you misunderstand that? You know, right? And now they're saying that, you know, no, it's all about love. Like, and so the early narratives of abduction scenarios, you know, going back from the 40s to probably early 80s, at least, maybe even to the 90s, was, you know, very negative, very scary, very probing, you know, paralyzed and being probed and having, you know, implants and all kinds of stuff happening to you, you know, bad stuff. But now it's, no, we need to increase our level of consciousness so that we are on a spiritual level to handle emergence when they come. And so even Travis Walton was talking like this. Whitley Strieber was talking about this.
I had a close encounter in 1985 that I wrote a book about, Communion. And after the close encounter, after I realized, it took a while for me to realize that it was real and was unexplained. I don't necessarily buy into the ET hypothesis. No one's ever showed me their houses on other planets, so I can tell you what I see and what I experience. And what I experience is an unknown presence that's extremely powerful and has a definite agenda in my life, which is to somehow or another beat me up, kick me around, throw me around the room, and do whatever it is necessary to increase my spiritual life and my spiritual understanding of that level of reality. I've been in a school ever since I acknowledged this, and what happened was I decided in about February, early March of 1986 that I wanted to try to re-engage with whatever was there, because it was something there, something real. And so I decided that what I would do would be to go out walking in the woods at night by myself, in the same woods that they had taken me before they took me up into the sky in their little thing. And I started doing that, and that was very difficult. It was very frightening because they're not pretty, and they were rough on me, and it was scary. And I also didn't know if I ended up going with them, if I would ever come back. So, and I had a family to think about. So I did it anyway, and it came back into my life. And it has turned into a 30-year journey in a school, their school, which is a school of higher consciousness. There is a dark side to this, though, that has nothing to do with me and with the ones I'm engaged with. At least they've certainly never shown it to me. I work with that too, to a degree, and accept that it's there. I've recently, in February of this year, they re-engaged very powerfully with me. They were, I had been working on a book about communication with them, and apparently I was going too slow. I was at a house in Texas where they often come to visit, to encounter me physically, And I had a ferocious and terrifying encounter where basically the message was, as usual, you're sitting on your ass. We want this book finished, so we're giving you a deadline. The deadline is March the 31st, and you do not want to know what we will do if you miss it. And that would be true. I did not want to know what, if anything, they would do. But I have a feeling that they would have not done much. They've never been violent toward me except the first night when I panicked and fought. But anyway, the book is now nearly finished. I finished the first draft by March 31st. I gave it to an old friend. He called me back and he said, "Whitley, what's wrong?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "This looks like the work of someone who was desperately trying to finish something. It looks like you thought you were going to be put on the gallows if you didn't finish. It's too hurried and too repetitive. You have to redo it." So now I've done that. And what is the book about? It's called A New World. And it is about my experience of 30 years of engagement with them. It is not a how-to book about how to communicate. It's about communication, but not a how-to book. They don't want a how-to book. They don't want everybody to do this the same way. They want every one of us to find our own way to them if we want to. And it's going to be more and more available. They want to emerge, but they can't do that unless we know something about how to communicate with them. We can't continue disclosure without emergence. It comes to a point very soon where the two go together hand in hand. And I'm about helping to make emergence happen, basically, by finding a core group of people in this world who will be able to communicate with them usefully when they do begin to emerge.
Dr. Michael Sala, who, again, bring me back to the original question if I rabbit trail too far here, but when I was doing flat earth research for last year's big conference, I was doing the debunking Flat Earth 101 series, and part of the debunking, I said, you guys don't know anything more about gravity than we do, so stop pretending you do. People that believe in the globe think gravity is the end all be all, but nobody knows what gravity is. The bottom line is we all know that when something goes up, it comes back down. We all, whatever your worldview is, we all believe that. As far as what gravity is, nobody knows. We're looking at theories put forward by, Isaac Newton and Einstein and whatnot, but they're just theories with many problems. It's gotten to the point now where you got Neil deGrasse Tyson saying, when it comes to our understanding of the cosmos, there's not enough gravity and mass and everything doesn't match up. We're 96% stupid.
We look out in the universe and 85% of all the gravity that's out there has some mysterious unknown source. We add up all the stars, the galaxies, the planets, the comets, the black holes, the dark clouds, everything out there that we can see, touch, smell, or taste. And it doesn't add up to give us the gravity that we see operating in this universe. So really we should be calling it the dark force, because we don't know if it's made of matter. It could be a profound misnomer, sending people off in thought directions that might not really be the right path. So dark matter is just simply what we call this thing about which we know nothing, responsible for 85% of the gravity of the cosmos. It is the longest standing unsolved problem in modern astrophysics. Dark matter, dark energy. Everything we know about the universe, what we're made of, galaxies, stars, planets, that's all right here. So, according to this chart, we are 96% stupid
when it comes to our understanding of the cosmos. And Michio Kaku says when it comes to our understanding of the cosmos, we're off by 10 to the 120th power. So let's stop pretending we know anything about this place, gravity and all that stuff. And in my research and doing that portion of the presentation, I came across this book right here, The Hunt for Zero Point by Nick Cook. Okay, and in this book, fascinating book, it talks about this guy, Townsend Brown, who had discovered anti-gravity, and it was all electromagnetism. all the terms were not so much mass, like you think in Einsteinian, Newtonian physics, gravity and mass and stuff like that. It had more to do with electromagnetism and reverse polarity and different things like that, messing around with mercury and stuff like that to create anti-gravitics. Now that was in the 1920s. And this guy points out documents going all the way well into the 50s, just prior to the founding of NASA in the late 50s, 1958, that like in Popular Science magazine and all kinds of, well-respected science periodicals talking about anti-gravitics. Well, if we had that stuff figured out in the 1920s, don't you think that by the time 40 years later we got to the 60s, they had it perfected and they could have easily faked all the stuff we see of astronauts floating around could be faked in a warehouse. Just turn the gravity off and dudes are floating around the warehouse or whatever, So, I go into, looking into antigravitics there. That led me into this other guy, Thomas Vallone, Electrogravitics, volume 1 and 2. That led me into Paul Lavalette, The Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion. I mean, there's well-documented stuff going back for decades on, programs. This takes you into like the Philadelphia experiment, and all kinds of stuff like that. Well, in the process of going through all that, I got introduced to the research of Dr. Michael Salla, and here's one of his books, The U.S. Navy's Secret Space Program and Nordic Extraterrestrial Alliance. And then we get into Antarctica's Hidden History, Corporate Foundations of Secret Space Programs, dealing with, and let me tell you, Antarctica is the key to figuring out everything. No matter what your cosmological worldview is, everybody is concerned with Antarctica. Lots of crazy stuff going on down there. Well, I took you on that rabbit trail to tell you that Michael Salla was on several of the panels, and on one of them, he, here's another one. This is Townsend Brown's Electrogravitics Research, the whole manual on his research back in the 20s. I mean, crazy stuff, patents and everything. Anyway, Michael Salla said that some of these programs and interaction with these so-called alien beings, they claim that 350 years in the future, why is it? I think they said something like 197 different alien species are regularly interacting with humans on Earth, whether it be with the government or with, private individuals or whatever. Something like 197, I believe, different species from different worlds out there, right? Okay, are interacting with us. So that then begs the question, if you believe this cosmological worldview, what makes Earth so important? Why? And even in Star Trek, there you see this, and other, even in the Marvel movies and stuff like that. It's like everybody's concerned with what happens here. Earth. Why is Earth so important? Well, biblically speaking, we know why Earth's important. It's the center stage main attraction. And oh, by the way, when at the end, what happens? God wipes out everything. All the stars fall where? Here. That's one of the reasons I moved over to Flat Earth, because somebody's lying. You got Isaiah, you got Yeshua, you got Peter, John talking about all the stars falling to Earth. Well, I mean, we got a major problem of Arcturus and Betelgeuse, and Andromeda is heading our way, right? Everything falls to Earth. The heavens burn up. Now, if you believe in the standard cosmological worldview, that means that the entire cosmos is subject to what happens here on Earth, and specifically to the fall of man going back to Adam. So this is interesting to me that all these aliens are very concerned with Earth, because 350 years in the future, according to their understanding in time travel, there's going to be a galactic tyranny. That's what they said. A galactic tyranny. And all the researchers of these other alien races came together to figure out, how did the whole, cosmos come under the tyranny of this one entity? And their research pointed to Earth. And so that's why all these Arcturians and Pleiadians and everybody else all of a sudden are concerned with Earth, is because whatever takes over the cosmos, this galactic tyranny, they traced it to Earth, the moon, and Mars. Hence why we're the great, petri dish.
Well, we know that the Montauk project was set up specifically to develop these time travel technologies so that they could be used in various programs. And you can be pretty sure that Russia had excellent intelligence on what the Americans were doing. And I would say that Russia, of all the nations, has probably kept close tabs on what the US has been doing for decades now in these classified programs. And you can be sure that if the US has developed time travel technologies where they can send people back and do these 20 and back programs, that Russia has that kind of capability as well.
Now, I suspected that, but what about China?
All right, do you have any sense that other nations are already on that as well?
Well, China is a late comer to the party, so they're doing their best to kind of like gather up all the intel that they can get on the US and what they've been doing, and the deep state is helping China to do that as well. So they're playing catch up, and they're getting closer and closer as far as I can tell. Yeah.
I wonder if you bring something back in time to the present, do you have to pay a tariff on that? Next question.
What about the second part of the
second part was, okay, are we using time travel? Again, next year we're going to have, I'm going to tell Vicki, next year we're going to have a Michael Salla panel. And it will be Michael and me up here, and we'll just take all the questions. But that's just kind of where it's going. Are we using time travel for the benefit of the Earth now, or is there multiple agendas or something?
Yeah, the different groups with their own agendas. Time travel technology basically goes back many decades because it's related with being able to generate sufficiently large electrostatic fields so that you can warp space-time. And so this has been something that has been replicated by different groups, different nations, and yes, in the US, I think you have various groups using it, some for good purposes, some for bad purposes, and people are talking about the Mandela effect, and I think that's probably something that is very real, that we are seeing kind of echoes of these attempts to manipulate the time stream so that we don't go down a particular path. And I think it's something of great interest to extraterrestrials as well, because, some are very concerned. One of the things that I got from a contactee that I think is very credible, Alex Collier, he said that he was contacted by this group of extraterrestrials from the Andromeda constellation, and they said that 350 years in the future there would be a galactic tyranny created, and they traced the origins of that tyranny to the Earth, Moon and Mars, and that's why many of the galactics are here, to find out what happened and to stop it.
What's going on here? Well, I mean, I look at that from a biblical worldview and I'm going, well, I don't know how much more time we have. Many people believe tomorrow's the end of the world, rapture's going to happen any day now, and the millennial reign sets up. Okay, let's say the 7-year tribulation kicks off tomorrow. Let's say the pre-trib rapture is true. We get raptured out, 7-year tribulation. I don't believe that either one of those are going to happen anytime soon, and I don't believe in the pre-trib rapture. I believe in, it's going to happen just like Jesus said. Yeshua said, after the tribulation of those days, you're going to see the Son of Man come and the angel is going to gather his people. Whatever. Then we get this millennial reign. So let's say the millennial reign kicks off in 2027. Well, you got a 1,000-year reign of Christ. So that would fit nicely into the 350-year prophecy that these aliens are worried about, that there is an entity that they don't like, that they consider tyrannical, their enemy is ruling, and it happens here on Earth. So I'm looking at this, from my biblical worldview, I'm going, all this fits perfectly. Now, throw out the words aliens and replace them with angels, and then replace them with fallen angels, and you realize they're worried about that. So they're going to try to get everybody on their side to oppose this person that they consider to be a tyrant, who we would consider to be the savior, the king, Yeshua. Well, read Psalm 2. The nations of the world have gathered to conspire against him and who's on the throne. Mm-hmm. Read Revelation 19:19. It says the nations of the world have gathered together to make war with him who's coming on, on the horse.
It's funny. I actually had Psalm 2 pulled up too. The reason being is exactly what we said. And on top of that, why do they imagine a vain thing? Like what are they actually thinking? Right? Exactly.
Vain thing. Yeah. Like I said, the whole conference, if you go to a conference like that with a solid biblical framework and an understanding of the angelic view of Genesis 6. If you're locked in the Sethite view, you're in for a world of shock with what's coming. And let me just tell you, something is coming, and you better get back into the books and start figuring it out. Nobody understood the Sethite theory. Nobody even imagined the Sethite theory until 160 AD, and even then it didn't take off until Calvin. Calvin's the one that really launched the Sethite theory, and now unfortunately that's what's predominantly taught in seminaries everywhere. And that is only playing right into the Great Deception, in my opinion, the Sethite view. You've got to have a proper understanding of what's going on in Genesis chapter 6 with the angelic view of Genesis chapter 6 in order to put, Steve Quayle says it's the Rosetta Stone for unlocking all of history in the Bible. I agree with him. As soon as you insert the angelic understanding in Genesis chapter 6 into your understanding of history and the gods of mythology, all of that stuff, and what's going on in the scriptures with the giants and, everything, and why God was telling the Israelites to, kill the women, kill the children, wipe out everything in these specific people groups. Either God's schizophrenic and into random acts of genocide, or he's got a legitimate reason for wanting very specific people groups completely, utterly destroyed and eliminated. And when you look into those people groups, it's all the ites, the Amorites, the Hittites, these are the ites that are in Genesis chapter 10, 6 through 20, that are identified as Nephilim.
Yep.
So it's, to me, it's like the research of my entire life came to a focal point at this conference. And, I took a fire hose over the weekend and only attended a fraction of these lectures. So I'm going to be quite busy going through the rest of them, but I've got a renewed passion in me to really get this information out there, because they are saying that there's a sense of urgency. The people at the conference.
How many people here feel that you are supposed to do something, but you don't know what? I want to see hands. Some people know, but some people don't. It seems that, and this was part of my presentation yesterday, that things are, I'm being told and feeling it, that are ramping up. How many people feel that things are ramping up now? Things have to be done. I've had hundreds of cases of experiencers either having a vivid dream or a vision of leading large crowds of people somewhere, but they don't know where. How many have had that dream or vision? Okay. Because I've been getting so many reports from experiencers for the last 5 years of feeling, and I call it the sense of urgency, that something is coming, even from researchers, experiencers who still don't know each other. And whenever I speak in front of audiences, I always ask the audiences, and it's always over 50% of hands going up, usually 70 to 80%.
In all of the time I have had the visitors in my life, I have never been pressured about anything like writing a book, until suddenly, as I said earlier, last February, this pressure showed up, and there's a sense of real urgency that I have never, as I say, experienced before. Now, the question of what to do in order to make the emergence and disclosure processes move together, because there's an awful lot behind the scenes that is held secret, that is far, far, far beyond a few little UFO videos from the Navy. An awful lot. I know a lot of it. And it can't come out for the following main reason is, once people realize that this is real, they're going, as far as the visitors are concerned, as far as I understand them, and I'm never sure I absolutely do, that what will happen will be, there'll be a sort of beat where everyone is pretty amazed, and then the media will be bringing every terror story and horror story they can find onto the public stage, because this is what will get the ratings, because fear sells. And they don't want this because a lot of that material, some of that material is quite real, and it has to do with the fact that this experience is very multi-layered and complex, and there are elements of it that are really hard to deal with. But a lot of it is imaginary and fantasy, and people relating it to other earlier religious concepts and so on and so forth. And it is going to create a mass of complete confusion. But the other thing that will then happen is we will become supplicants because we're going to see what they have. And all of a sudden, we're all going to want this because they have incredibly cool things. The physical aspect of this, it involves extraordinary technology. My own uncle, Mickey, was involved in the Roswell incident at Wright Field in the air material end of it. And he saw some of these materials and tried to work with them, and so did his friend, General Arthur Exum. And they were and are phenomenal, incredible things. There's a lattice, molecular lattice in some of the metal that is unlike anything we've ever known, and it makes it extremely strong and very, very light. So all of that is there. And the next thing after the fear mongering is over and all that confusion will be, we want their stuff. And companies will come, people will come, all trying to figure out the physical technology, which isn't even very important. But then we will become supplicants, like when advanced technological civilizations like the British or someone went to a primitive culture in the Amazonia or Africa or somewhere. The first thing these people all wanted was what they had, their stuff, their knives, their guns, all of that stuff. And this isn't about their knives and their guns. It's about our souls. And this is why we need this basic group of people who can relate sensibly to this, so that emergence, when it takes place, will have at least a healthy core. And that is where we are right now, I think.
Almost across the board, they're saying there's a profound sense of urgency. That's why we're seeing an increase in the UFO activities.